The war between the humans and the Vareen Empire began without warning. Across the stars, fleets clashed in violent bursts of light and steel. Cities on alien worlds shook under bombardment, and colonies burned. No one could say who fired the first shot, but both sides fought with a fury that left the galaxy trembling. Rylan Voss was a soldier, but he had never been this far from Earth. His unit had been deployed to the edge of Vareen space to protect a mining outpost. They expected skirmishes, not a full invasion. The first wave came at dawn. Enemy ships dropped from the sky like predators. Raylan barely had time to grab his rifle before the outpost was swallowed in fire. In the chaos, he fought through collapsing corridors and blinding smoke. His squad scattered, some cut down by plasma fire. Rylan pushed toward the hangar, hoping to escape, but a sudden blast threw him off his feet. His helmet cracked. The world spun. When he woke, the battlefield was gone. He was lying in a dim, gold-lit hall with alien guards standing over him. They took his weapons, but not his life. Raylan was brought before a woman, unlike anyone he had ever seen. She was tall, with deep blue skin and hair like woven silver. She wore ceremonial armor, and her gaze was cold but curious. Around her neck hung a pendant shaped like a burning star. Her voice was sharp yet smooth when she spoke, and her words carried weight. "You are a soldier of Earth. Why are you alive when my guards should have killed you?" she asked. Raylan said nothing at first, unsure if speaking would mean death. She studied him, her eyes moving like she could see through his bones. Finally, she told the guards to leave them alone. When the doors closed, she stepped closer. "I am Zyra Velarin, daughter of the High Regent. This is my city. You stand here because I chose not to end you." Rylan didn't understand why she spared him. He expected interrogation, perhaps torture. Instead, she asked him questions about Earth, its oceans, mountains, and skies. She wanted to know why humans fought with such reckless bravery. Raylan answered carefully, aware that every word might decide his fate. But her expression softened with each answer, like she was studying something rare and dangerous. Days passed in the alien palace. Raylan was kept under guard, but treated with unexpected respect. Zyra would summon him often, and their talks grew longer. She confessed that her people saw humans as unpredictable, even feared them for their stubbornness. Yet she seemed fascinated by it. One evening, she showed him the great balcony where the twin suns painted the city in gold. She told him of her late husband, a warrior who had fallen in battle. In her hands she held a blade that pulsed with green light. "This sword belonged to my ex-husband," she said, her voice low. "It is the most sacred weapon of my house. No Vareen would dare hold it now. But I see in you the same fire that once burned in him. You fought without hope, yet you still fought. That is why I give it to you, human." Rylan stared at her, stunned. The guards shifted uneasily, whispering in their language. This was not a gift lightly given. To take it was to accept something far beyond honor. It was to bind himself to her in the eyes of her people. His hands trembled as he touched the hilt. The blade hummed in his grip, like it recognized him. Zyra stepped closer, so near he could feel her warmth. "If you accept this, you are no longer my prisoner. You are my ally, my chosen. My enemies will be yours, and yours will be mine. Do you understand?" Her eyes searched his face, not for fear, but for resolve. And in that moment, Rylan knew his life had just shifted into a path from which there was no return. Rylan could not sleep that night. The sword lay beside him on the table, glowing softly in the dark chamber. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Zyra's face as she handed it to him. Her voice still echoed in his mind, heavy with meaning. This was not just a weapon. It was a promise, a claim, and a warning all in one. The palace guards treated him differently the next morning. Some bowed slightly as he passed, though others glared with open dislike. Raylan knew enough about warrior cultures to understand what had happened. Zira had made him part of her inner circle, and with that came both protection and danger. Allies would expect him to act as one of them, and enemies would now see him as a rival. When Zira summoned him to the council chamber, he entered to find the room filled with armored nobles. They sat around a long table of black stone, each wearing a crest on their chest. As soon as Raylan stepped inside, the murmurs began. Some of the nobles rose from their seats, anger plain on their faces. One of them, a tall male with silver markings on his skin, slammed his fist on the table and spoke in a sharp tone. "You bring an outsider to our war council, High Lady?" The noble demanded. "A human soldier? Our people have fought and died for centuries without their kind. Now you give him Vareen steel?" The accusation hung in the air like a drawn blade. All eyes turned to Zira. She did not flinch. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of command. "This human stood alone against our enemies and refused to yield," Zira said. "He is worthy of the weapon and the place it grants him. Any who doubt it may face him in the dueling ring." The noble's mouth tightened, but he said nothing further. Raylan could feel the tension rising, a storm building in the air around them. After the meeting, Zira led him down a private corridor. Her tone softened once they were alone. "The man who challenged me was Lord Zivran," she explained. "He has long wanted my seat at the War Council. You holding that sword humiliates him. He will not forgive this." Raylan understood the risk now. This was not only about winning battles on the front lines. It was about surviving the shadow war inside these palace walls. That evening, Raylan trained in the palace courtyard under the watchful eyes of alien warriors. The sword was lighter than it looked, its balance perfect in his hands. It seemed to guide his strikes rather than simply respond to them. As he moved, he noticed a figure watching from the upper balcony. It was Zevran, his eyes narrowed, his expression cold. Raylan knew a challenge would come sooner or later. Days turned into weeks, and the war outside the city grew worse. Reports came in of human and Vareen forces clashing across multiple star systems. Yet inside the palace, Raylan's role shifted from prisoner to advisor. He sat beside Zira during strategy meetings, offering human perspectives the Vareen had never considered. Some of his ideas were adopted, and small victories followed. But each victory seemed to deepen the resentment in Zevran's eyes. One night, while Raylan walked the quiet gardens, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Zevran approach, his hand resting on the hilt of his own blade. "You carry Vareen steel, human," Zevran said. "That means you carry the honor of a house you do not deserve. I challenge you at dawn. Decline, and you prove yourself a coward before the entire council." There was no threat in his tone, only certainty. Then he walked away, leaving the challenge hanging heavy in the night air. When Raylan told Zira, her jaw tightened. "He wants to kill you to take the sword," she said. "If you lose, he will not spare your life. If you win, he will become your enemy forever." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But if you do nothing, they will see you as weak. And weakness will destroy you faster than any blade." Raylan looked at the sword resting in its sheath, the green glow reflecting in his eyes, and knew there was no turning back. The dawn came with a sky streaked in gold and red. The palace courtyard was filled with warriors, nobles, and guards, all gathered to witness the duel. Raylan stood in the center, the green-lit sword in his hands. Across from him, Zevran emerged in silver armor, his expression carved in stone. The crowd fell silent as the master of the ring stepped forward to speak the ancient words that bound the challenge. "This is a fight to first blood or death, as agreed by both parties," the master announced. "There will be no interference, no retreat, and no dishonor in the use of skill. Begin when the signal is given." His voice echoed off the high walls. Raylan's grip tightened on the hilt, and the hum of the sword steadied his breathing. His eyes locked on Zevran's, reading the man's every movement before the first strike was thrown. The signal came in the sharp clang of a bell. Zevran moved. Fast, closing the distance in a blur of motion. His blade came down in a heavy arc, but Rylan stepped aside and countered with a precise slash. Sparks flew as metal met energy. The crowd roared in approval. Zevran pressed harder, his attacks relentless. Raylan's training kept him alive, but he knew one mistake would cost him more than the fight. Each swing carried the weight of Zevran's pride and his hunger for the Velaran blade. Minutes passed in a storm of strikes and parries. Rylan began to see a pattern in Zevran's moves. He was powerful, but his pride made him predictable. Waiting for the right moment, Rylan feinted left, and then spun to the right, his blade catching Zevran's side. A shallow cut, but enough for the green energy to flare. The master of the ring stepped forward and raised his hand to signal the outcome. First blood. The human is the victor, the master declared. The courtyard erupted in a mix of cheers and angry shouts. Zevran's face twisted in fury, but he bowed stiffly before turning and leaving the ring. The victory had been clean, but Rylan knew it was far from over. Defeating Zevran in public had made him even more dangerous. The man would not rest until he reclaimed his honor or destroyed Raylan completely. Zira entered the courtyard, her presence drawing silence from the crowd. She placed her hand on Rylan's shoulder and raised his arm high for all to see. "This is my chosen," she said loudly. "He has proven his worth by skill and by courage. Let no one here doubt his place among us." Her voice carried over the walls, leaving no room for argument. Rylan could see both respect and resentment in the faces around them. Later, in the privacy of her chamber, Zira poured 2 cups of a dark, sweet-smelling drink. She handed one to Rylan and studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You have won their eyes today, but not their hearts," she said. "Some will stand beside you, others will wait for a moment to strike. You must be ready for both." Raylan nodded, feeling the weight of the sword at his side. It was no longer just a gift. It was a shield and a target. Reports from the warfront came in that night. Human forces had taken heavy losses in one sector, while Vareen fleets had been pushed back in another. Zira studied the maps with a frown. "The enemy is moving faster than we thought," she said. "If they break through this line, they will reach our homeworld." Raylan leaned over the table, pointing to a narrow corridor of space. "We can cut them off here if we move now," he suggested. She glanced at him, then nodded slowly. Within hours, orders were sent. The palace became a hive of movement as warriors prepared for deployment. Raylan found himself at the head of a mixed unit of human and Vareen soldiers. Some met his gaze with respect, others with open suspicion. The journey to the front would take them through contested space, and every soldier knew the enemy would strike before they arrived. Yet the unity of their mission pushed them forward under the same banners. As the fleet left the safety of the homeworld, Raylan stood on the bridge beside Zira. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, and the hum of the ship's engines filled the silence between them. She turned to him, her eyes sharp. "This battle will decide more than territory," she said. "It will decide if our people can fight as one. Fail, and we both lose everything." Raylan looked out at the darkness beyond the glass and felt the weight of every life depending on their success. The fleet cut through the darkness of space like a spear aimed at the enemy's heart. Dozens of Vareen warships and human cruisers moved in tight formation, their hulls glinting under the light of distant stars. The crew on each vessel worked in silence, the weight of the mission pressing down on every soul aboard. Raylan stood on the command deck, his eyes fixed on the tactical display, waiting for the inevitable sign of contact. Hours passed before the first warning came. A red alert flared across the screens as enemy ships emerged from warp. Their numbers were smaller than expected, but their formation was sharp and predatory. Zira stood beside him, her hand resting on the hilt of her ceremonial blade. "They are testing us," she said. "They want to see how well humans and Vareen fight together." Raylan gave the order to intercept, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. The clash was sudden and violent. Energy bolts tore through the void, lighting the battlefield in bursts of blue and green fire. Raylan's ship shuddered under the force of the first impact, but the shields held. He issued rapid orders, directing Vareen fighters to flank the enemy while human frigates focused on disabling their engines. The mix of tactics caught the enemy off guard, forcing them to break formation. "Push them now," Raylan commanded. "Don't let them regroup." The fleet surged forward, pressing the advantage. One by one, enemy ships began to fall back, their retreat covered by heavy fire. But as victory seemed close, a massive spike on the scanners drew everyone's attention. A much larger enemy vessel had entered the fight, its silhouette blotting out the stars. The bridge fell silent as the size of the threat became clear. The enemy flagship moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of something that believed it could not be stopped. Its weapons lit up, sending a storm of energy toward the Allied ships. The first salvo tore through a human destroyer, splitting it in two. Raylan gritted his teeth and called for all ships to spread out. Zira leaned forward, her voice sharp. "We cannot outrun it. We must cripple it here, or the line will fall." There was no hesitation in her tone, only resolve. Raylan made the call to commit everything they had. Missile barrages and concentrated plasma fire lit the space between the two forces. Fighters swarmed the flagship's hull like hornets, striking at weak points in its armor. The Vareen crews fought with precision, and the human ships matched their ferocity with relentless strikes. Slowly, the shields of the massive vessel began to flicker under the combined assault, but the enemy commander was no fool. A sudden wave of counterfire crippled two Allied cruisers, sending them drifting helplessly. Raylan's ship took a direct hit to its port side, alarms blaring as systems failed. Sparks rained across the bridge. Zira caught herself against the railing, her eyes locked on the flagship's main cannon. "If that fires again, we lose half the fleet," she warned. Her voice left no room for delay. Raylan seized the cum and gave the order for a concentrated strike on the cannon's power core. Every available ship adjusted their aim, their weapons blazing in unison. The flagship's hull split under the focused barrage, and the cannon exploded in a blinding flash. A cheer erupted across the bridge, but it was short-lived. The enemy vessel, though crippled, was still moving and trying to ram a Vareen battleship. With seconds to act, Raylan ordered his ship to intercept. The impact jolted every bone in his body, but the maneuver pushed the enemy vessel off course. It spun away, its engines failing completely. The remaining hostile ships broke formation and fled into warp. The battle was over, but the cost was heavy. Wreckage floated in the void, and the fleet's numbers had been cut by nearly a third. As the damaged ships regrouped, Zira placed her hand on Raylan's arm. "Today, you saved more than just my people," she said quietly. "You saved the bond we are trying to build." Her words carried a weight deeper than gratitude. Around them, the surviving crews worked in silence, patching wounds and preparing for the next stage of the war. For Raylan, the battle had proven one thing: trust between their worlds was fragile, but it could hold under fire. The fleet returned to the homeworld under a veil of mixed emotions. The battle had been won, but the cost weighed heavily on every survivor. Ships limped into the docking bays, some with entire sections missing. Crews disembarked in silence, carrying the injured on stretchers and the fallen wrapped in flags. Raylan stepped off the transport to see the palace courtyards lined with waiting citizens, their eyes filled with both relief and grief. Zira walked beside him, her armor polished but scarred from the fight. She held her head high, but Raylan could see the strain in her posture. Inside the palace, the War Council awaited. The Great Hall was already filled when they arrived, voices raised in heated argument. Some praised the alliance with the humans, claiming the victory would not have been possible without it. Others accused Zira of risking Vareen honor for foreign help. Lord Zevran stood at the center of the storm. His voice cut through the noise as he pointed directly at Rylan. "This human brings danger to our halls," he declared. "The cost of the battle proves it. He draws enemies to us like blood in the water. How many more of our people must die to protect his kind?" The accusation hung in the air, and several council members nodded in agreement. Zira stepped forward, her voice cold and commanding. "The cost of the battle came from the enemy, not from our allies. Raylan fought with honor and skill, saving this fleet from destruction. If any here doubt his worth, they may challenge him as Zevran once did." Her gaze swept across the room, daring anyone to speak. No one answered, but the tension remained, thick and unmoving. After the council was dismissed, Zira led Rylan to her private chambers. She closed the doors and let out a long breath. "Zevran will not stop," she said. "The victory embarrassed him, and now he will work through politics rather than the blade. He will gather allies, spread lies, and make your presence here harder every day." Raylan rested his hand on the hilt of the green-lit sword, feeling its hum like a steady heartbeat. Later that evening, a messenger arrived bearing a sealed scroll. It was written in the Vareen High script, but Zira translated quickly. "It is an invitation to a banquet," she explained. "The nobility wishes to honor the victory. But such gatherings are more dangerous than battlefields. Words can cut deeper than steel in those halls." Raylan understood. The banquet would not be a celebration, it would be a test. The palace ballroom shone with gold and crystal light. Long tables overflowed with dishes from across the empire, and music drifted through the air like a carefully chosen disguise. Raylan walked beside Zira, his human uniform replaced by a finely tailored robe in Vareen colors. Every pair of eyes in the room followed them, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. Conversations halted when they passed, only to resume in low whispers. Zevran approached with a goblet of wine in hand, his smile a mask. "A fine night to honor our defenders," he said smoothly. "Tell me, human, does your people's loyalty last as long as your victories?" The question was laced with poison, but Rylan met his gaze without flinching. "Where I come from, loyalty is proven in actions, not words," he replied. A few nearby nobles murmured at the response, their expressions shifting. The rest of the night was a dance of careful words and silent battles. Raylan felt the pressure of every conversation, each one probing for weakness. Zira moved through the crowd with the grace of a warrior and the cunning of a strategist. By the time they left, no open challenge had been made, but Rylan could sense the undercurrent of hostility growing stronger. The banquet had not ended the conflict, it had only marked the next stage. As they walked through the quiet palace corridors, Zira stopped and looked at him. "You held your ground well tonight," she said. "But the shadows here are full of knives. We must prepare for more than battles in space. Our enemies will strike where they think we are weakest." Raylan tightened his grip on the swords hilt, the glow casting light across the polished stone floor. He knew she was right. The real war was just beginning. The night after the banquet was unnaturally quiet. The palace, usually filled with the soft hum of activity, seemed frozen. Raylan walked the halls alone, his footsteps echoing against the tall stone walls. He felt a prickle on the back of his neck, the kind that warned a soldier of unseen eyes. His hand instinctively rested on the hilt of the green-lit sword as he slowed his pace. Without warning, the lights in the corridor flickered and died. The silence deepened, replaced by the faint sound of movement in the shadows. Figures emerged from the darkness, masked and armed with curved blades. Their armor bore no house crest, marking them as assassins for hire. Raylan raised his sword just as the first one rushed forward, their weapon flashing in the dim light. The clash rang through the hall as steel met energy. Raylan stepped back, deflecting the strike and countering with a swift cut that forced his attacker to retreat. Two more closed in from the sides, their movements quick and precise. Every strike was meant to kill, and every dodge brought the fight closer to the walls and pillars. He moved with disciplined focus, counting each step to avoid being surrounded. Sudden shout echoed from behind him. Zira appeared, her own blade drawn, the silver steel catching what little light remained. She joined the fight without hesitation, cutting down one assassin with a single decisive strike. Together they moved in perfect rhythm, covering each other's flanks. The air filled with the sharp ring of blades and the hiss of the green energy. Slicing through armor, one assassin leaped from a higher ledge, aiming for Zira's back. Raylan intercepted, blocking the strike and driving the attacker back with a powerful swing. The blade hummed as it cut through the assassin's guard, sending them crashing to the floor. But for every one they defeated, another seemed to step. From the shadows, it was clear this was not a random attack. Someone had sent them with a purpose. The fight spilled into the outer courtyard, where moonlight revealed the full number of enemies. At least a dozen remained, forming a tight ring around them. Zira's breathing was steady, her eyes locked on the leader, a taller figure with a blackened mask and twin blades. "Zevran's work," she said under her breath. "He will not face us openly, so he sends others to do it." Her tone was sharp, her anger controlled. The leader struck first, their movements faster than the rest. Raylan parried one blade but barely caught the second, the force sending a jolt up his arm. Zira pressed in from the side, her sword flashing in the moonlight. The three clashed in a whirlwind of strikes, each exchange more dangerous than the last. Around them, the remaining assassins circled like predators waiting for a moment to strike. A loud horn sounded from the palace gates. Moments later, armed guards flooded into the courtyard, their armor glinting under the moon. The assassins hesitated, realizing their advantage was slipping. Zira took the opening, driving her blade through the leader's guard and sending them to the ground. At her signal, the guards charged, cutting down or capturing the remaining attackers. The courtyard was soon littered with fallen bodies and dropped weapons. The captain of the guard approached, his voice tight. "High Lady, the prisoners refuse to speak. They carry no identification, and their armor is unmarked." This was a professional strike meant to leave no trace. Zira nodded, her eyes narrowing. "Then we will find the trail in other ways. No one sends blades into my home without paying the price." Her words carried across the courtyard like a promise carved in stone. Later, in the safety of her chamber, Zira turned to Raylan. "This was meant to frighten us into retreat," she said. "But it has only hardened my resolve. Whoever hides behind these assassins will soon find themselves facing us directly." Raylan met her gaze, his grip firm on the hilt of the glowing sword. The hum of its power seemed louder in the quiet room, as if it too understood the vow they now shared. The morning after the assassination attempt, the palace was a fortress. Patrols doubled in every corridor, and no visitor entered without being searched. Raylan stood with Zira in the war room, where a map of the city was spread across the table. Red markers indicated where the assassins had slipped past the guards. The pattern was too precise to be chance. Someone inside had helped them gain access. Zira tapped a section of the map with her finger. This gate was left unguarded for 6 minutes. "Long enough for trained killers to pass through," she said. Her voice was steady but sharp. Raylan studied the map, noting how the route avoided crowded areas and led straight to the upper halls. "They knew exactly where you would be," he replied. "That means they had someone feeding them information." The room felt colder with the truth spoken aloud. A guard entered carrying a bundle of blackened armor taken from one of the dead attackers. Inside the breastplate was a hidden symbol etched into the metal, Zira's eyes narrowed when she saw it. "This is not Zevran's mark," she said. "It belongs to the Shadow Syndicate. They sell their blades to the highest bidder. If they are involved, then whoever hired them has deep resources." Raylan knew that meant their enemy was even more dangerous than they thought. They decided to move quickly. Waiting would only give the conspirators time to strike again. Zira summoned a small team of trusted warriors and gave the order to prepare for a covert mission. Their target was a syndicate safe house on the far side of the city. Raylan was given command of half the team, his green-lit sword a silent reminder of the trust she had placed in him. They would move at dusk, blending into the crowded streets before slipping into the shadows. The safe house was hidden in the lower districts, surrounded by towering buildings that blocked the moonlight. The team split, approaching from multiple directions. Raylan led his group through a narrow alley, his senses alert for movement. At the signal, they breached the door, weapons ready. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and smoke. Crates lined the walls, and in the center, a table covered in maps and coded messages. One of the warriors began searching the crates while Raylan examined the table. The map showed the palace, the fleet docks, and several other military sites. Red circles marked key locations. Among the papers was a list of names, some of which Raylan recognized as members of the War Council. Before he could read further, a shout from the other side of the room warned him of danger. Hidden doors swung open, and armed syndicate fighters poured into the safe house. The fight was brutal in the tight space. Raylan's sword hummed with each strike, cutting through armor and scattering sparks in the dim light. The enemy fought with desperate speed, but the allied team's coordination was sharper. Zira's group arrived through the opposite door, her blade flashing silver as she drove back two attackers at once. The battle ended as quickly as it began, leaving only silence and the faint crackle of a tipped-over lantern. Zira crossed the room and picked up the list Raylan had found. Her expression hardened as she read the names. "These are not just traitors," she said. "They are the architects of the attacks. Some of them sit in the council chambers. They have been undermining us from within while pretending to stand beside us." Her words carried the weight of betrayal, and Raylan felt the heat of anger rise in his chest. The team gathered what evidence they could, and destroyed the safe house to prevent it from being reused. As they made their way back through the city, Zira kept the list close, hidden inside her armor. "We cannot strike all of them at once," she said. "If we act too openly, the rest will vanish into the shadows. We must choose the first blow carefully." Her eyes held a cold determination that Raylan had come to recognize. When they returned to the palace, Zira called for a private council with only her most loyal allies. The plan they began to shape was dangerous but necessary. They would confront the highest-ranking traitor in public, forcing the others into panic. That would make them reveal themselves or flee. Raylan knew the next move would decide the fate of their alliance and perhaps the entire war. The final confrontation was coming, and there would be no turning back. The council chamber was filled with tension as Raylan and Zira entered. Every seat was taken, the nobles dressed in their finest armor and robes. The air smelled faintly of incense, masking the sharper scent of unease. Zira walked with her head high, her green eyes scanning the faces before her. Raylan followed at her side, the glowing sword resting on his hip like a silent threat. On the table in front of Zira lay the list recovered from the safe house. She placed it down with deliberate care, letting the parchment's edges curl in the warm air. "We have traitors among us," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "Some of them sit here now. They have plotted with the Shadow Syndicate, hired assassins, and endangered our war effort." Murmurs swept through the chamber as eyes darted nervously from one noble to another. Lord Zevran leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a faint smile. "You speak of betrayal, yet you bring a human into this sacred hall and arm him with Velaran steel," he said. Perhaps it is you who have turned against our traditions." His words carried challenge, but Zira did not flinch. She gestured toward Raylan, her voice steady. "This human has fought beside us, bled for us, and saved us from defeat. His honor is greater than that of those who hide behind masks and shadows." She lifted the parchment and read the first name aloud. The room fell silent, the noble in. Question froze, his hands tightening on the arms of his chair. "You have no proof," he said quickly, but his voice trembled. Zira motioned to one of her guards, who stepped forward and placed on the table a sealed packet taken from the safe house. Inside were letters bearing the noble's own crest, detailing payments to the syndicate. Gasps filled the room. The accused. Noble tried to rise, but Ryland stepped forward, the green-lit blade humming as it left its sheath. "Sit," he ordered, his tone calm but heavy with threat. The noble sank back into his seat, his eyes darting toward the door. Zira turned to the rest of the council. "This is the proof we needed. He will be stripped of his title and tried for treason. Let this be a warning to all who would side with our enemies." The guards escorted the traitor out, but the ripple of fear remained in the room. Zevran stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "One man's guilt is not clear. The rest," he said. "You cannot cleanse the council with a single blade." Zira's gaze locked on him. "Perhaps not," she replied, "but it is enough to make the rest reveal themselves." She knew he would either move too soon or retreat to save himself. Either way, she was ready. That night, Rylan and Zira walked the palace walls in silence. The stars hung low, and the cool air carried the scent of the city below. "You realize Zevran will strike again," Rylan said quietly. Zira nodded. "Yes, but now he knows we will meet him in the open. He will have to choose between risking everything or losing the power he craves." Her hand brushed against the hilt of her blade, a gesture of readiness rather than fear. In the days that followed, the council moved cautiously. The war continued, but the alliance between humans and Vareen grew stronger. Rylan trained both species. Side by side in the palace courtyard, the sound of clashing steel ringing out each morning. Zira oversaw new battle strategies, combining the precision of her people with the adaptability of humans. Victory after victory began to turn the tide of the war. When the final battle came, it was fierce but decisive. The Allied fleet broke through the enemy lines, forcing a retreat that ended the conflict. News of the victory spread quickly, and celebrations erupted across the empire. In the palace, the council bowed before Zira and Rylan, acknowledging their leadership. Even Zevran, though silent, offered a curt nod before leaving the chamber. His defeat was not in battle, but in losing the support he once commanded. That evening, under the light of the twin moons, Zira stood on the balcony with Rylan. She held the green-lit sword in her hands, its glow reflecting in her eyes. "This sword belonged to my ex-husband," she said softly. "Now it is yours, not as a symbol of debt, but as a bond between our peoples. Together, we have faced enemies within and without. Together, we have won." Raylan took the blade, feeling its weight not as a burden, but as a promise.